What's up, guys? Luke here from Spotlight on Spurs. So, Thomas Frank to Tottenham Hotspur looks close. It looks like Thomas Frank will be the new Tottenham Hotspur manager. And to get some inside information, I reached out to the Brentford Hive on Twitter and asked him to give his opinion on all things Thomas Frank. So, we asked him a few questions in terms of what we can expect, what sort of formations he plays, how he is as a person, and he even gave us some areas that he thinks that Thomas Frank will look to improve on in this Spurs team. Massive thank you to the Brentford Hive. His links are in the description box below, so please go drop him a follow on all the different links. And of course, if you haven't already, please like, subscribe to this channel. That's it from me. Let's hand it over to the Brentford Hive to give his opinion on all things Thomas Frank.
So Spotlight on Spurs has asked me to make a video about Thomas Frank now that it seems likely he will become your new manager, from what he's like as a person to what he'll bring to the club. So starting off with what he's like as a person, he's one of the best man-to-man managers in the league. If any of the players have a problem, whether it's a football problem or a real-life problem, it does feel like, from the outside looking in, that they will go to Thomas Frank first. He's great at getting the best out of people and just works so well with the players first and foremost, and that's what I really like about him as a person and as a manager. But in terms of his managerial skills, he's very adaptable. When we came up to the Premier League, we played with a back five against the big six clubs, but he realised, a couple of seasons in, that it wasn't really working anymore. In the 22-23 season, we took more points off the big six than any other club in the league. But then the season after, we lost both Aaron Hickey and Rico Henry to long-term injuries, and it just wasn't really working with the back five anymore. So last season, the season just gone, he changed it again. We haven't played the back five, we've gone to a 4-3-3 or 4-2-3-1 in every game, even against the big six, and it's worked out well because we've taken points off the likes of Arsenal and Man City in this year alone. So he's very good at adapting. If something isn't working out tactically, he will tweak it, he will change it, even in-game. Lots of times, I'm sure Spurs fans will get used to seeing this, but he brings out the tactics board if things aren't working out, and, you just know that, he's going to change something, he's going to do something to make it work. And I think at Spurs, the biggest question marks, the biggest flaws maybe might have is how will he deal with having such a big squad, right? Even though Spurs fans might look at it as a big squad, when you compare it to Brentford, at Brentford, if you lose, 2-3 players, key players to injuries, you're kind of in a lot of trouble. Whereas at Spurs, yes, last season they did go through a serious injury problem, but they were still fielding good players every single week. And, presuming you don't have the same level injury crisis again, Thomas Frank will have a really big squad to work with, and players like James Maddison or, Kulusevski might have to go on the bench in a couple of weeks, and how he deals with that I think will be interesting to see, and also how he deals with Champions League football, because it's a massive step up. He's gone from just Premier League to Premier League and Champions League in a brand new club, a brand new environment. So I think that'll be the most interesting thing to see how he copes with. In terms of, what Thomas Frank, how he will do at the club, I personally believe, and this is sort of a prediction, but if he's backed well enough by Daniel Levy, which in and itself probably won't happen, but if he's given the time, I think he will win a Carabao Cup or an FA Cup in the next 2-3 years at Spurs. The question is, does he last 2-3 years at Spurs? And that's, again, another question. But if he's backed, if he's given the time, I do think he will win. I think the hardest part as Brentford fans, having, watched Thomas Frank week in, week out for the last 7 years, is watching him leave to a club where it kind of feels like half the fan base is already against him. But I do hope Spurs fans welcome him well, and I do hope that he goes on to have a very successful time. And obviously, there's players at the club right now who have already, Thomas Frank has tried to sign in the past, like Archie Gray and Brennan Johnson. In terms of how we set up, he'll most likely play with a 4-2-3-1 or 4-3-3 formation, and I think players that you'll probably look to sign in the summer are particularly a defensive midfielder, maybe a goalkeeper who's better with his feet. Obviously, I know you signed Kinksky recently, and Vicario's your number one, but I'm a bit sceptical about Vicario's footwork ability, and Thomas Frank, his goalkeepers in his systems are one of the most important, if not the most important players. So I maybe think you'll probably look at a goalkeeper and also defensive midfielder. Someone like João Paulinho, I think, would be the perfect fit. But that's my thoughts. Thank you to Luke for having me on, and I do hope Spurs have a good season, although I do hope you don't do the double over us this season like last season, and I hope that Thomas Frank has a good time in Spurs and he's welcomed well.